Let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered what it really meant to survive in a world without mercy? Not in books, not in fantasy, but in blood, in ash, in silence. This isn't just history. This is the underworld of the past, the forgotten chambers of human power, where names were erased and legends were born. We begin with the medieval assassin, not the glamorous killer from the movies, but the hollow-eyed shadow forced to trade morality for survival. Then we follow a woman wrapped in snakes and prophecy, Olympias, queen of Macedonia, who carved a kingdom for her son with fire and fury. From there, we descend into ancient Crete, to a people who built temples so beautiful they became myths. And then, we face the machines of war, battering rams, siege towers, catapults, trebuchets, until stone crumbles and minds surrender before walls do. This isn't just about kings and castles, it's about what we do to each other. When fear becomes law, and survival becomes identity. And if you're still here, still listening, that means you're one of us. You don't just want a story. You want the truth beneath the ruins. So before we begin, hit that like button, not for me, but for the forgotten, for the nameless, the hunted, the crowned, and the crushed. Because in this series, we don't just study history, we step into it, and we don't look away. And so we begin. Not with a king, not with a hero, but with the one who hides in silence, the one whose name was never meant to be remembered, the blade in the dark, the consequence of everything we choose to forget. No one dreams of becoming an assassin. No one wakes up on a cold winter morning with smoke curling under a thatched roof and rats scurrying beneath the floorboards and says, "I want to be an assassin." No child in a dirt-poor village grows up dreaming of slitting someone's throat in exchange for a few blood-stained coins. No boy fantasizes about sleeping in moldy cellars, surviving on crusty bread and the smell of fear. No one chooses this life, but some are pushed into it. Because becoming an assassin isn't a dream. It's a consequence of war that left you parentless, of famine that forced your father to sell you to men who called themselves trainers, but were really just traffickers with sharp blades and colder hearts, a consequence of a world that valued people not by their soul, but by their usefulness, who you could kill, who you could serve, who you could disappear. You don't become an assassin. You slip into it, like a stone dislodged by rain falling off a cliff. At first, you're just a thief. A loaf of bread here, a coin pouch dangling from a noble's belt, a chicken from a merchant too slow to count. But then, you get caught. And when that happens, a man in a gray cloak looks at you through the prison bars. He says nothing, just nods. That night, you're released. In your hand, a name, a dull knife, a crude map. No one teaches you how to kill. You learn the same way the poor learn everything, by not dying. The first time you do it, your hands shake, not because of the blood, but because of the emptiness. You don't feel disgust. You don't feel guilt. You feel nothing. A silence inside you that should never have been there. You tell yourself just this once, then once more, then again, until one day you can't remember the first face or the first scream. Only the feeling of going colder, piece by piece, with every life you take, not their life, yours. No one dreams of becoming an assassin, but some people, they never had any other dream to begin with. And once you've crossed that line, once the first name is gone, the first scream is swallowed, and the blade becomes part of your hand, you enter a world no map dares mark. They call it a profession. As if killing people sits somewhere neatly between blacksmithing and weaving. As if there's apprenticeship, a guild, paid holidays, and retirement plans. The truth? The assassin's trade is no trade at all. It's a string of nameless jobs ruled by silence, paranoia, and the ever-present knowledge that you're disposable the moment you're done. There's no guild of assassins, no oath of brotherhood, no union to protest when you get stiffed. No one will avenge you if you're betrayed by your employer. No one will bury you if you mess up and end up dangling from the city gate. There is only one rule: kill, then vanish. You don't negotiate. You don't even know who hired you. Just a name, sometimes scrawled on damp parchment, sometimes whispered by a man who disappears before dawn. And if you succeed, if you're lucky enough to live through it, the one who paid you might also be the one who poisons your wine. Because your death is cleaner than your silence. Everything in this profession runs on necessity and fear. No one trusts you. No one wants you alive for too long. And don't expect gratitude. People need you. Until they don't. Once the job is done, you're no longer a tool. You're a loose end, and loose ends get cut. As for payment, sometimes it's a bag of silver, sometimes it's a stale loaf and a bed of hay behind a church stable. Occasionally the reward is just not being publicly hanged in the morning. This trade doesn't let you grow old. It doesn't offer exits. It gives you two endings: a fast death in a gutter, or a slow one in obscurity under a false name no one remembers. This isn't a profession. It's the final option for those who've run out of all others. And if you're thinking, well, at least the money's good, let me stop you right there. Do it for the money? The money never comes. People always ask, how much does an assassin earn? Adorable. Naive, really. Honest men get cheated out of wages. What makes you think a hired killer gets paid on time? They say they'll pay you. They swear. On holy relics, noble crests, trembling hands behind velvet curtains. But when the job's done, they always have something else. An excuse. We didn't think you'd survive. We were robbed on the road. You went too far. You know too much. You should disappear. And just like that, all the blood you spilled means nothing. The coin never comes. But the consequences always do, right on schedule. Suddenly you're being hunted, not by the target, but by the very people who sent you. Because you're not just the blade, you're the witness. And witnesses are dangerous. You don't get to be angry, or cry, or beg. In this line of work, emotions are luxuries you can't afford. All you get to do is understand. This is the way the world works. Sometimes you'll get a pouch of silver. Other times, a ragged sack with a few copper coins and a look that says, take it or die. And once in a while, you'll get nothing at all, except the cold steel of a betrayal sliding between your ribs. The ones who last don't live for the money. They live for the skill, for the reflex, for the momentum, because there's nothing else left to live for. The money's never enough, because the blood you shed never really had a price. Not to them, and eventually, not even to you. One day you'll sit in a dark room counting more scars than coins. You'll wonder if every life you took was worth the scraps tossed your way. You'll ask yourself quietly, did I sell my soul for pocket change? And even if the coin does arrive, it's never enough to buy what you really need. Not armor, not safety, not peace, just enough to replace the knife you left in someone's back. Forget what you've seen in stories. There's no enchanted dagger, no elegant poisoned ring, no blade that whispers through the air with supernatural grace. That's for the bards, not the broken. In the real world, your gear is whatever you can afford, or whatever you can steal. Your first weapon? Probably a kitchen knife, rusted at the edge, handle wrapped in cloth to keep it from slipping when your hands get wet, with blood or sweat. If you're lucky, you might pick up a short sword from a corpse who no longer needs it. If not, you're carving your future with tools meant for chopping meat. Your boots don't silence your steps. Your cloak doesn't billow dramatically. It drags, wet with rain or sewer water. Your belt? Just long enough to hold something sharp and something deadly, though sometimes they're the same thing. No armor, no chainmail, not unless you want to sound like a walking death bell. Protection slows you down, and you can't afford to be slow. You have one advantage in this world: the moment of surprise. If you lose that, you're just a murderer with a short lifespan. The rich have symbols, crests, rings, weapons forged by master smiths, passed down through bloodlines. You carry nothing anyone would want to inherit. And yet, every scratch on your blade, every tear in your clothes tells a story. Not of glory, but of survival, of slipping past guards in pitch dark, of crawling through basements and latrines to get inside places you don't belong, of bleeding in silence because you can't afford the sound of pain. You stitch your own wounds. You clean your own blade. You sleep with your back to a wall and your hand on the hilt of something that's not even yours. You don't dress for style. You dress to vanish. You don't carry trophies. You carry tools, used, forgotten, ugly things that only matter because they work. And still, every now and then, someone asks, "What kind of weapon do assassins use?" And you smile, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Whatever's not nailed down. Because in your world, there are no sacred weapons, only survivors. And once you're armed, if you can even call it that, the real problem begins. Not how to kill, but when, where, and just how wrong everything can go. The target is never easy to kill. They tell you the mark is weak, predictable, always walks alone, always sits by the window, always leaves the tavern after the third drink. They say it like they're handing you a script, but people aren't scripts. And no one, not once, is ever as easy to kill as the ones who hire you like to believe. Because the moment you step into the real world, the story unravels. That predictable target suddenly decides to sleep in, or brings an extra guard, or turns left instead of right, or steps into a church and kneels for hours while you rot in the shadows, blade in hand, praying for the opportunity to do something unholy. You think you're in control. You're not. You're just someone waiting for the perfect moment in a world that doesn't care about your timing. Sometimes the target fights back. Sloppy, yes. Desperate, always. But desperate people do damage. They scream, they claw, they bleed all over you. They run when they're not supposed to, or worse, beg. And if they beg well enough, something in you stutters, and stuttering, in this profession, gets you killed. The clean kill? That's a myth. No one just dies. They flail. They shit themselves. They cry. Or they look at you like they know you, and in that second, something inside you flickers. A face, a memory, a voice that sounds too much like your own. Then it's gone. But it takes something with it. And sometimes it's not even the target that ends you. It's the dog, or the servant who wasn't supposed to be home, or the maid who opens the wrong door at the worst time. You choke them out. You do what you must. You add names to your list that were never supposed to be there. And when it's over, there's nothing clean about it, nothing righteous, just blood. Too much of it. On your hands, on the floor, in your lungs. You were told it would be quick. You believed them, once. Now you know better. There's no such thing as an easy kill. There are only lucky ones, and even luck comes with a body count. So when someone hands you a name and says, "This one's simple," you don't smile, you don't nod, you don't feel anything at all. You just ask, "What's the catch?" Because there's always a catch. And in this life, the ones who think otherwise, they don't last long enough to ask again. And after the kill, when your heart's still thundering and the blood hasn't dried, you don't rest. You change. Not who you are, just who you look like. Because in this world, survival isn't just about the blade. It's about becoming someone no one remembers. You disguise yourself, but you can't hide the trembling. The disguise is always the easy part. A monk's robe, a servant's apron, a guard's helmet too big for your head. You slip into roles like second skin, stitched together with stolen fabric and second-hand lies. The world sees what it wants to see. And that's the trick, isn't it? They don't look too closely. No one does. People don't see danger when it looks like a cook hauling sacks of grain. They nod, grunt, wave you past with greasy fingers and tired eyes. To them, you're invisible. But inside, you're not calm. You're counting steps, timing breaths, watching the way your fingers twitch too early, the way your eyes dart where they shouldn't. Your heart isn't steady. It's banging at your ribs like a prisoner trying to escape. Your palms are slick. Your stomach is a knot of rope soaked in bile. And no matter how many times you do this, no matter how many layers of fabric you throw over yourself, you always feel like you're one wrong blink away from being found. Because it's not the disguise that protects you. It's the illusion that you believe it will. The trembling? It's your body remembering the last time, the close call, the moment you almost didn't make it out. The face of the man who looked straight at you and paused, too long. The way your knife shook before it sank in. The way he gasped your name, even though you never gave it. You can cover your face with ash. Wear someone else's shoes. Change your posture, your accent, your scent. But fear has a rhythm, a weight, a smell. And dogs, soldiers, priests, they all know how to sniff it out. That's the part no one teaches you. Not the blade work, not the poison, not the pressure points. They don't teach you how to stop your hands from shaking when someone gets too close and says, "Do I know you?" They don't teach you what to do when a child stares at you too long, when a woman tilts her head and narrows her eyes, when a drunk man touches your arm and suddenly your cover feels like paper set on fire. You smile, you play the part, and still, you shake. You learn to move with it, hide it behind a cough, a stumble, a bowed head. You convince yourself they didn't see, that they're too busy, too blind, too drunk. Maybe they are, but you know better, because you've done it too. You've spotted the lie in someone else. You've seen that barely there tremor, that glance too sharp, that pause too long. You know how the hunted look. And now, sometimes, you see it in your own reflection. You can hide the shaking. You can fake the accent. You can play every part like a master of masks. But when the disguise comes off, what's left is the part no costume can cover. The loneliness, the paranoia, the quiet truth that even when no one's looking, you're still being watched. Always alone, always hunted. You don't walk with anyone, not anymore. Even when the streets are full, even when you're shoulder to shoulder with market crowds or drinking in a tavern packed wall to wall, you are alone. You've trained yourself to be invisible, but somewhere along the way, you forgot how to be seen. You sit in corners, face to the door, back to the wall. You eat fast, chew silently, leave before the second round is poured. No friends, no favorites, no habits. Because anything repeated becomes a pattern, and patterns get you killed. You learned that early. There was a time, long ago, when you tried to trust someone, just one. Someone who looked at you and didn't flinch. Someone who laughed the same way you used to laugh, before the blade became your language. You let your guard down, just for a night. By morning, they were dead. Throat slit. Not by you, but because of you. After that, you stopped pretending. Now, solitude is your only safety. Silence, your closest companion. But it doesn't keep you safe. Not really. Because while you walk alone, you are never alone. Something, someone, is always behind you. You can't see them, but you feel them. Like a shadow that shouldn't be there. Like eyes that refuse to blink. They don't speak. They don't move. They wait. You change routes, sleep in different places, Walk through rivers to hide your scent. Sit awake through nights that never end. Still, they're out there. A former client, a rival, a soldier's son, a nobleman's niece, or maybe just someone who heard a name whispered in a market and decided you needed to disappear. You don't know. You'll never know. And that's the point. This life doesn't let you retire. It doesn't allow long goodbyes. You don't get to fade gently into legend. You vanish, quickly, or quietly, or screaming. And in your place, just an empty name and a warning. Never trust a killer who survives too long. Even your own body begins to betray you. You hear a creak in the dark and your muscles seize. A child laughs too loud and your fingers curl like claws. You walk past mirrored glass and flinch, not at the sight of your face, but at the stranger behind your eyes. You try to sleep. You can't. You try to rest. You dream of running. You try to pray. But the silence that answers back feels far too familiar. Ellen hunted. Not because of what you've done, but because of what you are. You're a wound that never healed. A memory that someone, somewhere, still wants erased. And deep down you know it's only a matter of time. You tell yourself solitude is safety, that paranoia is protection. But deep down, you know the truth. It's not the loneliness that kills you. It's the moment you stop being afraid. Because in this world, survival doesn't reward the brave. It rewards the careful. And the second you forget that, one small mistake equals a horrifying death. All it takes is one mistake, one breath too loud, one footstep too early, one glance in the wrong direction. That's all it takes. And you die. Not quickly, not cleanly, not like in the stories. You die with a blade between your ribs while your mouth is still forming an apology. You die choking on your own blood in a stranger's cellar. You die with your hands outstretched, trying to crawl toward a door that no one will ever open. And if you're lucky, if you're very lucky, no one sees your face. No one remembers your name. But most aren't that lucky. You've seen the ones who made mistakes, the careless, the tired, the ones who got comfortable. One was found hanging upside down in a tavern, skin flayed like butchered game. Another was nailed to the gate of a city they thought they'd escaped. And one, just one, you found yourself. Sprawled in an alley, eyes wide, lips parted as if trying to whisper your name before the cold took her. You buried her. You didn't even know why. She was a warning. You were just too stubborn to listen. The thing no one tells you is that the closer you get to mastery, the harder it gets. Because now you know what to fear. Now you understand what the stakes really are. The amateurs don't last long enough to realize that precision isn't a skill. It's a curse. You have to see everything, hear everything, control every breath, every blink, every shift of weight. Your mind becomes a battlefield of second-guessing. Was the guard 2 steps behind or 3? Did the door creak louder than usual? Was the candle in the window a signal or just a trick of the wind? The worst part? You never find out. You act anyway. You kill anyway. Because hesitation is its own kind of death. But even when you succeed, even when you walk away, you're not safe. That one mistake, however small, is now part of you. You carry it. You relive it. You wonder when it'll catch up to you, because it always does. No matter how sharp your blade, how quick your reflex, how flawless your disguise, one day you'll slip, maybe just once. But once is enough. And when it happens, there will be no final speech, no last confession, just a flash of steel and the realization that you were human after all. One small mistake. That's all it takes. You try not to think about it. That one day, your mistake will come. Not in a blaze of glory, not with a final battle, but in silence. And when it does, there's no one left to mourn you. Because that's the final truth, the one they never write in songs. Assassins don't grow old, they vanish. You never see an old assassin. Think about it. There are no wrinkled hands sharpening blades behind taverns, no graying figures in corner booths whispering war stories, no quiet elders teaching the next generation how to kill quietly and leave without a trace. They don't exist. Not because they weren't real, but because they're gone. They vanish. Some disappear into the night after one job too many. Some bleed out in alleyways, never identified, never buried. Some change their name, their face, their walk, and become someone else entirely, if only for a little while longer. But none of them grow old, because this life has no finish line, no retirement, no final contract, no clean ending, only silence. You used to wonder where they went, the ones you heard about, legends, ghosts. You used to think maybe they'd escaped. Maybe they found a cottage in the hills, a false identity, a second chance. But now, you know better. They didn't escape. They just became one more name that people stopped speaking, one more shadow that slipped through the cracks and dissolved into smoke. You've already started to feel it. Your joints ache in the cold. Your hands don't move quite as fast. Your breathing's heavier when you climb. And sometimes, only sometimes, you hesitate. Just a second, just enough. The worst part? No one will notice when you're gone. No one will mark the day. No candle will be lit. No name carved into stone. You don't even have a real name left, do you? Just a dozen aliases and one true self that you buried long ago, beneath layers of blood, dirt, and silence. People forget you in life. They erase you in death. And maybe that's the point, because if you were remembered, you'd be hunted. If you were known, you'd be betrayed. So you built a life designed to disappear, and one day, you will. Not with glory. Not with honor. Not even with regret. Just quietly. Unceremoniously. Like smoke fading from a blown-out candle. Like footprints in the snow melting before sunrise. Some will say you never existed at all. They won't be wrong. Because assassins don't grow old. They vanish. But just because you vanish doesn't mean the world forgets. Not really. Because where your body fades, your shadow remains. Twisted into something darker, something colder, something they whisper about long after you're gone. The assassin's image, cursed and cloaked in superstition. You vanish from memory, yes, but not from fear. What's left of you doesn't walk in the streets or sleep in a bed. It lingers in whispers, in shadows, in the stale breath of tavern stories and the quiet dread of nobility who glance over their shoulder in candlelight. They don't say your name, not because they forgot it, because they fear what speaking it might summon. You see, the world didn't bury you like a man. It wrapped you in something else, something darker. They turned you into a curse. Assassins became omens. People claimed your touch withered crops. That birds flew the other way when you passed. That mirrors cracked in your presence and dogs howled without cause. They said you could vanish into smoke, or walk through doors without opening them. That no blade could pierce your flesh unless it was blessed. You didn't start these stories, but you never denied them either. Because fear is protection, and belief, however twisted, is power. A noblewoman wears an amulet of bone to keep your kind away. A priest spits when he hears of a sudden, unexplained death. A child's drawing of a shadowy figure is burned, just in case. And every city, every kingdom, every castle has its own version of you. A faceless killer with hollow eyes, a black hood, and a name no one dares speak aloud. It doesn't matter who you really were, you've been replaced by myth. And in a strange, bitter way, that's the only immortality you're allowed. But superstition is a double-edged dagger. The more monstrous they think you are, the less human you become. And soon, even you start to forget the difference. Was there a time you laughed freely, loved someone, had a home? Or was that someone else, long gone, replaced by this husk in leather and silence? They made you a creature. You let them. Because it's safer to be feared than forgotten. And now, when they speak of you, they lower their voice. They say it like a prayer, or a warning, or a curse, as if even your story carries weight. They say you appear when the candle flickers, that your eyes shine in moonlight, that your blade leaves no wound, only silence, that once you're named, you're already too late, and so you become legend. Not the glorious kind, the kind that keeps people up at night, the kind that doesn't knock before entering, the kind that never truly dies, the kind that wears the shape of a man but carries the weight of something far older, something cursed. But legends don't just haunt shadows with blades. Sometimes they wear crowns. Sometimes they're born with omens in their breath and serpents at their feet. Because the line between feared assassin and feared queen isn't as wide as history likes to pretend. Betrayal, the superstitious and mysterious princess. Before she was Olympias, the mother of Alexander, the queen of Macedonia, the whisperer of snakes, she was simply Betrayal. And even then, people feared her. Not because she was cruel, not because she was powerful, but because something about her didn't feel entirely human. She was born in Epirus, a wild, forested land where myths breathed through trees and gods slipped in and out of mortal skins. The air smelled of pine and prophecy. Her people believed in omens, crows flying north, dreams with bleeding moons, twins born under thunder. Betrayal didn't just believe these things. She lived by them. She wouldn't step outside if the wind blew east. She wouldn't eat figs in spring. She spoke to the dead like they were old friends and slept with a dagger under her pillow, not for protection, but for communion. They called her blessed. They called her touched. Some said she was a priestess of Dionysus. Others swore they saw her dance barefoot in torchlight, eyes rolled back, hissing like something ancient. Snakes slithered through her dreams and curled at her feet in the morning, unafraid. Betrayal didn't speak like a child. She recited myths as if she remembered them. She looked into fire and said things that would come true. And when she looked at you, really looked, people said it felt like drowning. She was the kind of girl no one dared offend. Not because she'd strike you, but because the gods might. Even in her early years, she understood power was never just in thrones or armies. It lived in symbols, in rituals, in the flicker of a flame before it died. And she learned to wrap that power around herself like a veil. Her father, King Neoptolemus III, kept her close, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of awe. He sent her to the temple at Samothrace, an island of mysteries and dark rites. There, among the secret initiates of the great gods, Betrayal was reborn, not as a princess, but as something older, more dangerous. She returned with new eyes, new silence, new serpents. And somewhere in the dark folds of prophecy, she stopped being Betrayal and began becoming Olympias. But when a girl wraps herself in prophecy, the world doesn't stay away for long. Fate always comes knocking, sometimes in the form of a prince. And when it didn't find Betrayal. It found the woman she'd become. The fated marriage to Philip II. She met him on an island of shadows and fire. Samothrace, where gods whispered through the wind and the dead were said to rise during ritual. Betrayal was there not as royalty, but as an initiate. Cloaked, barefoot, drenched in the scent of incense and sea salt. She had entered the sanctuary to receive mysteries that few ever understood, and fewer survived unchanged. And that's where he saw her. Philip of Macedon. A prince at the time, newly blooded, ambitious, scarred. A man whose hands already smelled of conquest. History would later say it was love at first sight. But love had little to do with it. It was recognition. He saw her, and something ancient stirred. Not desire, not beauty. Power. Not loud, not obvious, but coiled. Waiting. She was unlike the women of his court. She didn't flatter. She didn't perform. She stood in silence and let the air bend around her. There was something in her stillness that unnerved even him, a soldier, a future king. When he asked her name, she did not say Myrtale. She said, "You may call me what you dream of." That was enough. The match was swift, political, convenient. Epirus would gain the strength of Macedon. Macedon would gain a bride with sacred lineage and rumors of divine favor. And Philip? Philip would gain a woman who moved like prophecy and kissed like war. They were married not under the gentle sun of romance, but under torches and omens. Legends say snakes coiled around the marriage bed that night. That Philip awoke in sweat, claiming he had seen his wife transform into a goddess with serpent limbs. He never spoke of it again, but he never looked at her the same way either. She became Olympias, formally, finally, the new queen of a kingdom ruled by iron and ambition. And though she wore the crown, she wore it like a blade, carefully, quietly, ready to draw blood when needed. There was no illusion of love. Philip was a man who collected wives like horses and discarded them as needed. But Olympias was different. She would not be discarded. She did not scream or beg or weep. She watched. She remembered. And she waited. Because somewhere in that fire-lit temple, long before she met Philip, she had been told a secret. Her son would be a god. And for that future to rise, kingdoms would burn. And from that union, sealed in omens, bound by ambition, came something more than legacy. Not just a son. A storm wrapped in flesh. A name that would shatter empires and echo through centuries. The birth of Alexander. Wrapped in prophecy and myth. He did not enter the world like an ordinary child. From the moment Olympias' new life stirred inside her, the world began to shift. Snakes began to curl beneath her bed each night, silent and watchful. The priests of Dodona whispered that the gods had marked her womb. Dreams came heavy, thunderous, Zeus descending in flashes of fire, touching her body with light. She did not call it madness. She called it confirmation. She had always known her child would not be mortal in the ordinary sense. Philip laughed at first, called it divine flattery. But then came his dreams, ones he did not share in full. Only fragments. A lion sealing her womb with a golden ring. A son swallowed by a larger one. Shadows bending low before a boy not yet born. Even Philip, a man of war, steel, and calculated conquest, grew quiet. When the time came, Olympias did not cry out. She delivered her son in a room darkened by ritual, anointed by sacred oils, watched by priestesses, not midwives. No men were allowed. Only women. Only whispers. The moment Alexander cried, the wind outside rose with him. In the distance, the temple of Artemis in Ephesus burned to the ground. Historians called it coincidence. Olympias did not. She said the world had to sacrifice something divine to make room for another. They named him Alexander. But to Olympias, he was never just a boy. He was a vessel, a living prophecy. The future king not just of Macedon, but of something larger, something stretched across deserts, mountains, oceans, and myths. She told him stories not of shepherds and saints, but of gods and conquerors. She fed him tales of Achilles, whom she claimed as his ancestor. She whispered that he had been born not from Philip, but from Zeus himself. And perhaps he believed her. Perhaps she believed it more than anything, because from that moment on, she no longer saw herself as a queen. She saw herself as the mother of a god. And no one, no rival, no king, no empire, would take that away from her. But prophecies, no matter how divine, are born into human courts, and human courts are not built for miracles. They are built for ambition, for rivalry, for the slow, quiet art of undoing. Jealousy and intrigue in the palace. The gods may have marked her son, but the court of Macedon cared little for omens. Palace walls were not built to hold divinity. They held envy, secrets, swords. Olympias soon learned that the real war wasn't out on the battlefield. It was in the halls of Pella, where every glance carried intent and every smile masked a strategy. She was Philip's queen, yes, but in Macedonia, queens were temporary, disposable, replaceable. And Philip, ever the conqueror, began collecting new wives like spoils of war. One in particular changed everything. Cleopatra Eurydice, young, Macedonian, beautiful in the plain, golden way that men preferred. More importantly, she was pure Macedonian blood, a detail that whispered louder than any of Olympias's foreign rites or snake-haunted dreams. With Cleopatra's arrival, Olympias felt the ground shift beneath her. No longer was she the mysterious foreign queen cloaked in divine promise. Now she was the outsider, the witch, the threat. Whispers began. That Alexander was not Philip's true son. That Olympias had seduced the king with Eastern magic. That her snakes were demons, not symbols. That her child was cursed, not chosen. Olympias answered with silence, but she never forgot a name, or a voice, or a face. She watched Cleopatra's belly swell with child, watched Philip's gaze turn elsewhere, watched the courtiers who once bowed to her now bend toward the newer, softer son. But Olympias was not soft, and she did not bend. She tightened her circle, hid her fire behind stillness, spoke little, listened always. If Philip thought he could replace her, he had forgotten one thing. She was not fighting for herself. She was fighting for a god. Every slight, every cold shoulder, every rumor sharpened her focus. Her son was not just her blood, he was her vengeance, her reply, her kingdom in waiting. And if she had to burn the palace down stone by stone to protect him, she would, because Olympias had seen the future. And it did not belong to Eurydice. It belonged to Alexander. But a woman like Olympias doesn't just endure betrayal. She studies it. She lets it ripen. And when the time is right, she answers. Not with tears, but with silence and strategy. When Philip was assassinated, who was the killer? It happened on a day meant for glory. 336 BC. Philip walked into the theater at Aegi, triumphant, cloaked in white, crown gleaming, surrounded by guards, by allies, by his wives and children, by gods, or so he believed. He had just married off his daughter. He had just united Greece under his rule. He was preparing for a grand invasion of Persia. And then, before the eyes of the world, he was struck down. One blade, one assassin, one breathless moment. The man who carved an empire died not in battle, but barefoot on a stone floor, bled out among the cheers. His killer? Pausanias, one of his own bodyguards, a man with a long history and longer grievances. Some said he acted out of personal vengeance. Others whispered of conspiracies. But the real question wasn't who held the knife. It was who sharpened it. In the days that followed, the rumors surged like wildfire. Pausanias was cut down as he tried to flee. Too fast, too clean, convenient, too convenient. Eyes turned to the court, to Cleopatra's kin, who suddenly vanished, to the generals, who stood frozen, to Olympias, who did not flinch. She wore white. She walked slowly. She said nothing, but the silence around her roared. They all remembered the humiliation, the rivalry, the childless bride suddenly favored. They remembered Philip turning away from Olympias. They remembered the way she watched, never forgetting, never forgiving. Did she order it? She never said. She didn't have to. What she did was far more telling. Within days, Cleopatra Eurydice, Philip's new wife, was dead. Her infant child strangled. Her family erased. Olympias didn't hide her hand. She placed her grandson Alexander on the throne and dared anyone to stop her. None did, because in that moment, she was no longer the foreign queen. She was the mother of the king, and perhaps, just perhaps, the architect of his coronation. History blinked and moved on. The world would remember Philip for his conquests, his ambition, his empire. But they would never forget how it ended, with blood on marble and a widow who did not weep. They called it fate. They called it revenge. They called it justice. But Olympias? She called it necessary. And as Philip's blood dried on the marble, the kingdom held its breath. Because a boy had inherited the throne. But a woman, a mother, had inherited the war. Olympias used blood to guard her son's throne. The moment Philip's body turned cold, the knives came out. Macedon had always been a kingdom of blades and shifting loyalties. But now there was a boy king on the throne. 17, brilliant, but young, alone. Or so they thought. They forgot he had a mother. And Olympias did not forget anything. The palace was still draped in mourning when she made her first move. Not with armies, not with threats, but with elimination. Cleopatra Eurydice, Philip's final wife, was found strangled. Her infant child smashed against a wall. Her uncle Attalus, a powerful general, killed by Alexander's own men soon after. One by one, any bloodline that could rival her son's was cut out at the root. She made no apologies. She called it loyalty. "You do not leave wolves in the nursery," she is rumored to have said. And so, she hunted them, every rival, every whisperer, every noble who looked at her son and saw weakness. She offered no mercy, because none had been offered to her. For every cold smile she endured, for every whisper behind her back, she answered with purifying fire. The court began to understand. This was no queen regent. This was a lioness. And Alexander, for all his ambition, was still her son. He may have taken the throne, but she built the fortress around it. Not of stone or law, but of fear. They say she walked the halls in silence, her snakes trailing behind her, her eyes unblinking. She whispered to the gods. She touched the altars. She moved like a woman not mourning a husband, but guarding a dynasty carved from her own womb. And in every action, there was one message. Touch him, and you die. Even Alexander felt it. He respected her, feared her, needed her, at least for now. He would go on to conquer the world. But in those early years, it was her blood that secured his crown. Not speeches, not treaties, not diplomacy. Blood, and Macedon learned quickly. Olympias was not a queen you challenged. She was not a mother you crossed. She was not a woman who forgot. She was the storm before the empire. The blood dried. The crown settled. But Olympias did not disappear into the shadows like a grieving widow. No, her war had only just evolved. Because once a throne is secured, it must be protected. And once a god is born, he must be guided. She was politician, priestess, and mother of an emperor. By the time Alexander ruled, Olympias had already mastered 3 empires: faith, politics, and blood. They called her queen, but that title was far too small. She was a strategist, reading court silence like scripture, anticipating betrayal in a raised eyebrow, and outmaneuvering men who never believed a woman could outthink them. She was a priestess, fluent in the language of dreams and rituals, binding allies with oaths spoken in the names of old gods, weaving prophecy into politics. Her snakes weren't just symbols, they were tools, reminders that her power came not from a crown, but from something deeper, older, and she was a mother, but not the kind who fades into the background. No, she shaped Alexander's destiny with her bare hands, whispered to him in childhood that he was descended from Achilles and fathered by Zeus. She fed him myth until he believed it, until the whole world did. But being mother to a god is not a role that allows retreat. You don't raise an emperor and return to the garden. You become part of the empire. When Alexander left to conquer Persia, Olympias remained in Macedon, not to weep, but to rule. She managed court alliances, watched over his enemies, sent letters packed with advice, correction, prophecy. Some said she meddled. Others said she protected him from afar. Both were true. And yet, the farther Alexander marched, the more distant he became, not just in miles, but in mind. He began calling himself divine, began making decisions without her counsel, surrounding himself with new advisors, foreign mystics, Persian wives. Olympias, ever watchful, began to feel the shift. She had shaped a god, but gods grow teeth, and power has no memory for those who helped build it. Still, she remained. Even as her influence waned, she never begged, never bargained. She was too proud, too cunning, too divine in her own right. Her enemies feared her. Her allies admired her. And all of them understood. Olympias was never merely a mother. She was the architect behind the empire, the high priestess of a royal myth, the storm that cleared the path for conquest. And though she was now alone in the palace while her son drank from rivers far away, she was never idle. Because every empire leaves cracks, and every throne makes enemies. And Olympias knew how to wait. But empires don't pause for mothers, and gods do not send farewells. When the letters stopped coming, when the news turned to rumors, and the silence grew louder than triumph, Olympias knew. Her son was gone. After Alexander's death, defending her grandson. When Alexander died in Babylon, the earth did not shake. But Olympias did not outwardly. Her voice did not rise. Her tears did not fall. But something behind her ribs shattered, and she knew the empire would eat itself alive. Her son had left no true heir, only a name carved across continents and a newborn boy, Alexander IV, far too young to rule. His mother was Roxana, the Persian wife Olympias never trusted. The generals, the Diadochi, had already begun circling like wolves, pretending to serve the child while carving out kingdoms for themselves. Olympias saw through it instantly, and for the second time in her life, she unsheathed her fury in the name of a child. This time it wasn't prophecy. It was blood. Her grandson, her last tie to the man she had created, protected, molded, was the rightful heir. And she would guard him with the same fire she once used to raise an empire. But Olympias was no longer feared as she once had been. She was older, distant, disliked. Macedon had changed. The Snake Queen who once walked in silence and summoned fear now stood nearly alone. Still, she moved. She crossed into Epirus, rallied old allies, and with the ghost of her son behind her, declared war on the regents who ruled in her grandson's name but plotted in their own. She captured cities, executed rival generals, ordered the death of Philip III Aridaeus, Alexander's half-brother, and his wife Eurydice, another queen who thought she could hold a crown Olympias had already buried one for. It wasn't justice, it was survival, and for a moment the world held its breath. It looked like she had won, but power, once lost, is never truly reclaimed. Her enemies regrouped. Antipater's son, Cassander, marched against her. Olympias asked for mercy, not for herself, but for her grandson. She offered surrender in exchange for the boy's life. Cassander agreed, and then he broke his word. Olympias was arrested, tried, not for crimes, but for the threat she still posed. The court offered her a sword to take her own life. She refused, so they sent the families of her victims to kill her. They trembled. Some refused, but in the end, stones did what blades feared to do. Olympias died not as a mother, not as a queen, but as the final warrior of a broken empire. They tried to erase her, but her bloodline lived on in legend. In her son who thought he was a god, in a boy she died trying to protect, and in the silence that followed her last breath, heavy, cold, and unrepentant. But legends don't end with a final breath. They echo, in blood, in silence, in the fears of those still clutching power. Olympias had died, but not vanished. The final war, confronting Cassander. In the twilight of her life, Olympias faced one last war, not for glory, not for vengeance, but for the blood of a child, the last flicker of Alexander's legacy. The empire her son had forged had splintered into pieces, scattered among generals who once bowed before him. Among them, Cassander, cold-eyed, calculating, the son of Antipater, and heir to the kind of ambition that didn't need prophecy to kill. He saw Olympias not as a widow, nor as a grieving mother. He saw her for what she still was, danger. She had rallied Epirus. She had taken cities. She had struck down Philip III and Eurydice. She had done what few men dared. She had challenged the power of the regents, and for a brief, searing moment, she held Macedon in the palm of her hand again. But time had turned against her. Her allies faltered. The generals who once feared her now looked to Cassander. And Cassander, he came not with rage, but with precision. Like a man cleaning up the ruins of an old world. He surrounded her at Pydna, laid siege not with fanfare, but with patience. Starved the city, cut off water, watched as her supporters fell away one by one. Olympias stood at the walls, wrapped in black, her face carved from stone. She had seen the rise and fall of gods. She had birthed one. She was not afraid of men. But this was not war. This was the slow erasure of a woman who had lived too long, defied too much, and refused to bow even when the whole world demanded it. When surrender became inevitable, she offered terms, not for herself, but for Alexander IV, her grandson. "Spare him," she said. "Let the bloodline live." Cassander agreed, lied. He arrested her. At trial, no defense was offered. She had no need to plead. Her crimes were known, but her power, that intangible ancient dread she still carried, was what truly haunted them. They didn't dare execute her with a sword. The soldiers refused. So they sent the families of her victims, turned justice into spectacle. But when they stood before her, stone in hand, they hesitated. Because even broken, even betrayed, Olympias did not kneel. She stood, unblinking, like a queen carved in myth. She did not scream. She did not beg. She faced death the way she had faced life, draped in shadow and unshaken. When the stones fell, they fell not on a woman, but on an era. Her body was broken, but her legend remained. Cassander won the war, but Olympias won the silence. No one ever forgot what it cost him to kill her. But death was never the end for Olympias. It was simply the point at which her myth began to harden into legend. An ending in legend, killed for being too fearsome. In the end, they didn't kill her because she was guilty. They killed her because she frightened them. because she was the last woman standing between a broken empire and the memory of a god, because she had outlived her usefulness, because they couldn't silence her with exile or erase her with rumor, because even stripped of army, crown, and family, Olympia still ruled the room. Cassander's hands were clean. He didn't touch the stones. He didn't need to. He simply stepped aside and let others do what he dared not. Let the families of the dead beat her into dust, thinking that vengeance could smother legacy. But Olympias had long since slipped beyond vengeance. By the time her blood hit the earth, she had already become something else. In whispers, in shadows, in the curled lips of marble statues, she lived on. As sorceress, as queen, as snake witch, as the mother of the divine. No woman before her had dared to shape an empire through myth, through fear, through motherhood. She didn't rule with a scepter. She ruled with vision. And that was what made her dangerous. They called her manipulative, ruthless, foreign. They said she poisoned, bewitched, devoured. They told stories of snakes slithering through her bedchamber, of omens spoken in her sleep, of gods who listened when she called. But beneath the fear was something deeper. Awe. Because Olympias did what no woman of her time was meant to do. She didn't survive history. She bent it. She bent it for her son, for her bloodline, for a dream so colossal the world cracked beneath it. She was both mother and monster, oracle and executioner, queen and heretic. And when they buried her, if they even dared, they didn't bury a woman. They buried a warning, a reminder that the most dangerous force in the ancient world was not a king, not a god, not a sword. It was a woman with vision, and even today, when we speak her name, we do so softly, because we know Olympias was never truly conquered. She was remembered, and that is its own kind of immortality. Olympias bent history through blood and prophecy. But long before her, before swords and empires, there was a different kind of power. Not carved in conquest, but painted in color, danced in silence, and hidden in curves. Exploring the palace of Knossos, a beautiful disorientation. The first thing you notice is that the walls curve, not like corridors, not like palaces you've seen in books, but like rivers, fluid, alive, as if the entire structure were a living creature slowly inhaling you. Welcome to Knossos, the palace that isn't really a palace, the labyrinth that doesn't need minotaurs to feel dangerous. You think you've stepped into a ruin, but it's more like stepping into a dream someone forgot to finish. The sun hits the faded frescoes just right, illuminating dancers mid-motion, bulls mid-leap, goddesses with bare breasts and hypnotic smiles. Red pillars rise like blood vessels from stone. The rooms open into other rooms. Staircases vanish into sudden sky, and nothing makes sense in the most seductive way. There are no grand thrones demanding attention, no signs pointing north. Knossos wasn't built to impress. It was built to immerse. You're not here to conquer it. You're here to get lost. Because getting lost is the only way to understand how the Minoans thought. This wasn't a civilization of straight lines and military parades. It was one of curves, waves, colors, and rituals. A place where the sacred and the sensual blurred into one. And maybe that's why it feels so strange. There's no war here, no screaming kings, no gods demanding sacrifice. Just echoes of music, traces of perfume, laughter baked into the walls. A quiet hum of women in charge, of mystery without menace. And yet under all that beauty, something stirs. Something ancient. Not violent, but powerful. Like the sea before a storm. Because this place, this labyrinth of light, was once the center of a world. A place where queens were priestesses. Where ceremonies weren't for fear but for joy, where the line between politics and magic wasn't a line at all, it was a spiral. You try to follow the path, but there is none. Knossos doesn't want to be solved. It wants to be felt. And as you step through another corridor that circles back into itself, you realize something unnerving. You're no longer exploring it. It's exploring you. The palace pulls you deeper, not to trap you, but to show you something. A civilization that vanished without a scream. A people who danced with bulls, painted joy on plaster, and vanished before war could stain them. A question with no answer. A myth without a monster. Just this. A beautiful disorientation. And maybe that's the point. You keep walking, through sun-warmed corridors and spiral stairs that lead nowhere or everywhere. And just when the beauty starts to feel familiar, it shifts. Something in the air thickens. Not darker, just deeper. As if the palace, after dazzling you with joy, is finally ready to tell you its secret. The origins of the labyrinth and the Minotaur. You wander deeper into Knossos, and somewhere between the third corridor and the fifth staircase, the air changes. It's not fear. Not yet. But something older, like a secret holding its breath. And suddenly you understand how the myth was born. Not from fact, but from feeling. Because Knossos doesn't just confuse the body, it disorients the mind. Its twisting halls, echoing chambers, and sudden drops into shadow don't follow logic. They follow ritual. And somewhere, long ago, someone must have entered this place and never found their way out. That's all it would have taken. A boy disappears. A whisper spreads. A story grows teeth. And in time, the story becomes a beast. The Minotaur. Half man, half bull. Not just a monster, but a metaphor. Born of lust, shame, and silence. The Greeks would say it was Queen Pasiphae, cursed to fall in love with a bull. That she birthed the beast, and King Minos, ashamed, locked it beneath the palace in a maze so vast no one could escape. But maybe the Minoans never built a prison. Maybe they built a mirror. A place so complex it reflects the mind back at itself. A place where monsters aren't trapped, but revealed. The Minotaur, then, isn't real flesh. He's the shadow. The thing you find when you go too deep. The part of the king he didn't want to name. The part of the priestess buried beneath ceremony. The fear inside civilization. The part that wears your face but does not obey. And the labyrinth? It's not punishment. It's initiation. A descent into yourself. A trial of confusion and confrontation. You don't escape it by running. You escape it by changing. The myth tells us that Athens sent tributes, 7 boys, 7 girls, into the maze as payment, as penance. That Theseus killed the beast and found his way out by following a thread. But threads are fragile. And what if the beast was never meant to be killed? What if the point was meeting him? Because every empire, no matter how beautiful, builds a chamber it doesn't talk about. A room for what must be hidden. A name that can't be spoken. A monster so closely tied to the crown that slaying him might mean slaying yourself. And Knossos, silent, golden, curved like a dream, is that room. So yes, maybe there never was a Minotaur. But every civilization has had to invent one. Because deep down we all know, it's not the labyrinth that traps us. It's the parts of ourselves we lock inside it. And so the story lingered, half memory, half myth. A maze that might never have existed. A monster that might never have been slain. But centuries passed, and still the earth held its secrets. Until one day, someone decided to dig. Sir Arthur Evans, the man who resurrected a legend. The palace slept for thousands of years, buried under dust, olive roots, and the forgetting of time. Until one man arrived with a shovel in one hand and a myth in the other, Sir Arthur Evans English, scholarly, obsessively curious. He came to Crete not to conquer, but to revive, to pull the past out of the ground and breathe story back into stone. In 1900, he began digging at a hill called Kafala, and what he found there didn't just confirm his suspicions, it changed history. Walls emerged, rooms multiplied, staircases led to nowhere. Frescoes of bulls, dancers, and goddesses surfaced from the earth, untouched by sunlight for millennia. Evans declared it Knossos, the labyrinth, the home of King Minos, the cradle of Europe's first civilization. He didn't whisper it. He announced it, with the certainty of a man discovering not just ruins, but proof that myth had once been real. But Evans wasn't just an archaeologist. He was a storyteller. And storytellers don't just reveal, they reshape. So he rebuilt Knossos, not exactly as it was, but as he imagined it should have been. He used concrete-colored paints, new columns where old ones had collapsed. He called it a restoration, but others would call it a reconstruction of dreams. To some, he resurrected a lost world. To others, he manufactured it. He brought Minos to life, crafted timelines, gave the Minoans their name. They never called themselves that. He made them feel Greek, European, royal, even though their art, their symbols, their rituals whispered something far more mysterious. What Evans wanted was clarity. What the ruins offered was ambiguity. But maybe that's why his version endured. People don't just visit Knossos today to see stones. They come to walk inside a narrative, one sculpted by Evans's imagination as much as by Minoan hands. And that's the paradox. He preserved the past by rewriting it. He honored myth by editing history. He gave us the labyrinth. But we'll never know exactly what he erased to make it fit the story. Even now, scholars debate him. Was he a visionary or a vandal? Did he give voice to the silent? Or did he drown them out with Victorian certainty? But one thing is beyond dispute. Before Evans, Knossos was a ghost. After him, it became a legend with walls. And perhaps that was the point all along. Because myths don't just live in temples or ruins. They live in the people who dare to dig them up, and the stories they choose to tell afterward. But even legends need foundations. And as Evans peeled back the layers of stone, he began to realize what he had uncovered wasn't just a royal residence. It was something older, something deeper, something sacred. More than a palace. A living temple. They called it a palace. But that's not quite right. Knossos had no throne room in the traditional sense. No war chambers. No towering statues of kings holding swords. What it had was movement. Open courtyards, light wells, flowing water, sacred rooms aligned with the stars. You didn't walk through Knossos. You danced through it, and that tells you everything else. This wasn't just a political center. It was a living temple, a place where architecture served ritual more than rule, where the sacred wasn't hidden behind closed doors, but woven into the walls. Every curve, every fresco, every sudden shaft of sunlight was part of something larger, a choreography of belief. Bulls leapt, women with bare chests and hypnotic eyes raised serpents to the sky, and painted dolphins swam above stone doorways, as if blessing every step. The Minoans didn't build temples beside their homes. They made their homes into temples. Here, religion wasn't something you visited once a week. It was something you lived inside. Evans saw that too in his way. Though he labeled Knossos a palace, he couldn't ignore the rituals he unearthed. Libation vessels, altars, sacred horns, double axes, symbols of devotion, not domination. Even the architecture whispered it. Rooms that open into each other like waves, corridors that spiral like a conch shell, stairs that descend into darkness and then back into light. It wasn't made for control. It was made for transformation. Because to walk through Knossos is to be initiated, not with priests in robes or doctrines shouted from pulpits, but through experience, through beauty, through presence. The earth here was not conquered. It was partnered with. The palace embraced the flow of hills and wind. It gathered the sun, redirected water, opened itself to the seasons. It was sacred not because it defied nature, but because it mirrored it. In a world of towers and thrones and blood-soaked crowns, Knossos dared something different. It made the divine intimate. It said the gods didn't live above us. They lived within us, in the act of pouring wine, in the flick of a dancer's wrist, in the quiet echo of hooves on stone. So no, Knossos was never just a palace. It was a heartbeat made of clay and color, a prayer you could walk through, a sanctuary where women led the ceremonies and beauty was law. And when it fell, it wasn't because of conquest. It was because the world changed. The gods moved on. But if you stand there long enough, under the open sky with your shadow stretching across those ancient stones, you might still feel it. The hum, the rhythm, the living breath of a temple that once welcomed all who entered with open arms and the whisper of mystery. And in this temple without priests, where sunlight did the preaching and curves carried the prayers, something even more radical emerged, a language without words. Because when your walls breathe and your gods live in color, you don't carve laws into stone. You paint them into being. Abstract symbols, a language of images. The Minoans left behind no epic poems, no carved proclamations of war, no royal decrees etched into stone to remind the world who ruled what. Instead, they gave us images, spirals, bulls, labyrinths, axes, lilies, eyes, dolphins, snakes, suns, not alphabets, symbols, not sentences, stories painted in silence. It's easy to walk through Knossos and think these are just decorations, just frescoes, just art. But pause. Look closer. There is no chaos here, no random beauty. Everything, the rhythm, the color, the placement, feels intentional. Like someone left behind a language not to explain the world, but to invite you into it. They didn't write. They evoked. A pair of bull horns atop a shrine, a double axe etched in stone, a serpent wrapped around a woman's wrist. These weren't metaphors. They were tools, used in rites, held in hands, placed in sacred spaces where gods might hear. And when the Minoans painted, they didn't paint kings at war or men on thrones. They painted motion. Young boys leaping over bulls, women dancing with uplifted arms, flowing garments, fluid limbs, faces turned not to the viewer, but inward, toward some inner knowing. They were telling us something, not in the way a historian might, but in the way a dream does, symbolic, non-linear, unforgettable. This was a culture that didn't fear the abstract. They lived in it. They didn't need sharp edges and straight lines to feel secure. Their truths moved in circles, spirals, waveforms. Their gods weren't angry sky fathers demanding sacrifice. They were present in animals, in nature, in rhythm. Even the few scripts they left, linear A, remain undeciphered. As if the Minoans looked at language and decided, words are too limited. Let them feel instead. Because maybe the point was never to explain themselves to us. Maybe the point was to leave behind something we'd have to sit with. Not decode like a manual, but absorb like a myth. And maybe that's why they still haunt us. Because in a world screaming for attention, a world obsessed with conquest, clarity, and being understood, the Minoans dared to be ambiguous. They left behind beauty without translation. They trusted that their symbols would speak anyway. And maybe they were right. Because thousands of years later, we're still listening, still tracing spirals with our fingers, still wondering what it all meant, and suspecting deep down that the meaning was never meant to be spoken, only felt. And perhaps that's the cruel magic of symbols. They can outlive their makers, but they can't protect them. Because even a language painted in mystery cannot hold back the tide of time. And at Knossos, time didn't come like a conqueror. It came like forgetting. Knossos didn't fall to war, but to time. Most great civilizations end with fire, with swords crashing and kings crying out, with cities burned and statues toppled, with names carved onto victory stones by the hands of the victors. But Knossos faded. There was no final battle, no last stand, no invader's flag planted in its sacred courtyard. The palace didn't burn in a single glorious night. It was abandoned, slowly, strangely, like a story that forgets how to end. Time swallowed it, not rage. And somehow that makes its silence feel louder. For centuries, it was the center of a soft empire. Not an empire of armies, but of trade, art, and seaborne influence. Its ships reached Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Aegean. Its rituals echoed across islands. Its symbols spread like waves. But then, something changed. Maybe it was the eruption of Thera, a volcanic scream that shook the earth and sky. Maybe it shattered the Minoan psyche more than their stones. Maybe it disrupted trade routes, weather patterns, and belief systems all at once. Or maybe it wasn't sudden at all. Maybe it was the slow erosion of magic, the way rituals lose their power when the gods stop answering, the way art becomes habit, the way silence grows in places where music once lived. By the time Mycenaeans came, they didn't conquer Knossos. They simply inherited it, took over the walls, repainted the stories, whispered new names into old shrines. But the soul of the place, the Minoan rhythm, the feminine grace, the symbolic language, it didn't survive the translation. It flickered, and then went out. And maybe that's what makes Knossos so tragic. Not that it was destroyed, but that it was forgotten. That a civilization so vibrant, so original, could leave behind no war, no last king, no loud ending, only a question mark buried beneath dust and olive trees. We don't know what they called themselves. We don't know what they believed when the sky cracked and the sea changed. We only know that they built something gentle, something strange, something impossibly beautiful. And then they let it go. No screams, no statues of dying heroes, just silence, and stone, and waves. As if the sea that had once made them had come to take them back, piece by piece, until even memory couldn't find the trail. Knossos didn't collapse like an empire. It drifted away like a myth. And sometimes, that kind of ending is the most powerful of all, because it leaves us asking, not what killed them, but what did they know that we forgot? Knossos drifted away like a myth. No war, no fire, no conqueror's roar. But not every city is allowed such grace. Some don't fade. They break. Because for every civilization that vanishes in silence, there's another that meets its end in thunder. And thunder had a name. Battering Ram, the first to break through before the fire, before the arrows flew or the ladders scraped stone. There was the sound, a deep, rhythmic boom, like the heartbeat of a god coming closer. And then it came into view, the battering ram. Not elegant, not glorious, just a hulking log, capped with iron, slung under a wooden shell on wheels. But it meant one thing. Your walls were no longer yours. You could shout from the ramparts. You could pour boiling oil, shoot arrows, pray to whatever gods hadn't already abandoned you. But it wouldn't stop the ram. It wasn't designed to bleed. It was designed to break. The battering ram was one of the oldest siege weapons ever devised, a marvel of brute intention. In the ancient Near East, they were already being used as early as the Assyrians, and across centuries, every civilization from Rome to Persia refined its cruelty. Sometimes it was carried by dozens of men, sometimes rolled on wheels beneath a roof of wet hides, so flaming arrows would slide off like curses hitting a wall. But always, always it had one job: pound the gate until the city surrendered or splintered. And it wasn't just the gate it was breaking. It broke morale. Every thud rattled through your bones, louder than any war horn. It said, "We don't care how thick your walls are. We're coming anyway." And unlike a siege tower or a catapult, the battering ram got intimate. It didn't attack from a distance. It got close. It kissed the door before it crushed it. For the defenders, this was psychological warfare. The wall, after all, was everything. It was safety, identity, civilization. And the ram came to teach you, nothing you build will hold forever. You could see the cracks forming. You could hear the wood moan. You could feel the certainty crumble before the stone did. And once that gate fell, it wasn't just soldiers who poured in. It was terror. It was history. It was the moment every decision you made as a ruler came crashing through the hole in your wall. Because the battering ram wasn't just a weapon. It was judgment on wheels. And the worst part? It didn't stop once the wall opened. It kept going, kept pounding. Because sometimes the sound of power isn't a scream. It's a steady, merciless boom that reminds you, someone out there is willing to break what you were too proud to surrender. If the battering ram was terror up close, a thunderous force that shattered wood and will, then its quieter cousin waited farther back. Not with noise, but with inevitability. Because sometimes, the most dangerous enemy isn't the one pounding on your door. It's the one you never see coming. Catapult, the long-range strategist. If the battering ram was the fist against your front door, the catapult was the sniper on the hill, watching you eat, sleep, pray, and deciding when to ruin your life. The catapult didn't rage. It calculated. It was the cool, distant killer of ancient warfare. And that's what made it terrifying. Because you never saw the catapult's face, only the results. A rooftop crushed, a tower split, a market square reduced to rubble in a heartbeat. It didn't even have to hit you. The message was clear. You're not safe. Anywhere. The origins stretch back to the Greeks, refined by the Romans, and later perfected by medieval engineers who understood. War wasn't just about proximity, it was about pressure. Siege was psychological, and nothing delivered dread quite like the arc of something falling from nowhere. Sometimes it was just stones. Massive sun-bleached boulders hurled over the walls like the judgment of angry gods, but sometimes it was worse. Dead animals, rotting corpses, barrels of excrement or infected meat. The catapult didn't just want to kill your body. It wanted to poison your mind, to make you question your air, your water, your food, to turn your sanctuary into a slow, reeking tomb. And all from a distance. That's the genius and horror of the catapult. It didn't engage. It loomed. It stayed just beyond your reach. Silent one moment, screaming the next. By the time you heard the thwack, it was already too late. Walls weren't enough. Prayer wasn't enough. Even courage bent beneath the weight of falling sky. And the irony? The catapult never hated you. It wasn't personal. That's what made it worse. The battering ram came at you with force and fury. The catapult didn't come at all. It let gravity do the talking. It let fear accumulate. You didn't fight it, you endured it, until endurance turned into sickness, sickness into silence, and silence into surrender. Because in siege warfare, the first to break is rarely the wall, it's the human spirit behind it, and the catapult knew exactly how to aim for that. But fear has levels. And after the silence of the catapult, after the sickness, after the sky itself turned traitor, came something worse, not louder, not faster, just heavier. Because if the catapult broke your courage, the trebuchet broke your world. Trebuchet, the king of siege, lord of gravity. It doesn't roar. It doesn't charge. It doesn't need fire or screams or frenzy. It just stands there, tall, still, silent. And then, it releases. The trebuchet isn't a weapon, it's a verdict. While catapults snapped like wild animals, trebuchets moved with something colder, something heavier. Physics, precision, patience. Where the catapult struck fear, the trebuchet delivered inevitability. Developed in the Middle Ages, it was the final form of the siege engine. It didn't just throw stones, it hurled boulders the size of cattle with astonishing accuracy. It didn't strain, it unfolded like a ritual. A counterweight fell. An arm swung, and from across a field, a wall ceased to exist. And the terrifying part? It was beautiful. Elegant arcs. Predictable math. The poetry of destruction written by mass and motion. You didn't have to storm the gate. You made the gate come to you. In pieces. And the sound? Not a shriek, not a clash. A low, distant thunder, like the sky groaning in slow motion. Followed by silence. Then stone upon stone falling in agony. Defenders watched, helpless, as the trebuchet pulled reality apart. You could feel it in your teeth when it released. Not just the strike, but the moment before. That sacred pause when gravity leaned in and whispered, "You can't win this." Once. The trebuchet was more than engineering. It was psychological warfare made mechanical. It didn't just attack your walls, it attacked your sense of permanence, because medieval people believed in the strength of stone. Castles were supposed to be eternal. Thrones sat behind towers. Faith rested in thick walls and high ground. And then came a machine that said, "None of that matters." With enough time and counterweight, even kingdoms could be undone. No need to risk soldiers, no ladders, no shouting, just the quiet rhythm of winding ropes, setting stones, waiting for the right arc. It could fire day and night. It didn't get tired. It didn't miss often. And when it did, it simply tried again. The trebuchet didn't lose patience, because it didn't need victory today. It only needed you to understand that victory was no longer yours. That's what made it king, not its size, not even its power, but the truth it forced you to swallow, that your defenses were nothing more than delays. And gravity, the one force no kingdom could bribe, beg, or fight, had already taken sides. But not every threat fell from the sky. Not every enemy hurled destruction from a distance. Some built it, brick by brick, board by board, until the horizon itself began to rise, and with it, the promise that your walls were not high enough after all. Siege towers, moving mountains of men. It starts as a shape on the horizon, too big to be a cart, too slow to be a cavalry charge, too silent to be an army. Then it grows, day by day, board by board, until it's towering over your ramparts, a wooden mountain with wheels. This is no ordinary engine of war. This is a siege tower, a mobile fortress, a staircase to death, a skyscraper of soldiers inching toward your gates like a rising tide of doom. And the worst part? You see it coming. You watch it being built. You hear the hammers. You smell the pitch. You count the days as it creeps forward, inevitable as sunrise, and just as unstoppable. The battering ram wants to break your gate. The trebuchet wants to break your wall. But the siege tower, it wants to stand where you stand, to rise to your height, to meet you eye to eye, and then pour an army onto your sacred stone like water down a staircase. They called them Helepolis, taker of cities. And rightly so. Massive wooden behemoths, sometimes 5, even 10 stories high, covered in hides to protect against fire, filled with ladders, archers, shielded soldiers, even mobile bridges waiting to drop onto your parapet. A city's height used to mean safety, used to mean vision, superiority, divine right. But the siege tower stripped that away. Now they could reach you. And not just reach you, surpass you. They didn't smash. They climbed. And climbing is psychological. When you see something climbing toward you, it's not just a threat. It's a challenge. It's your gods being tested. It's your belief in your walls and your worth being scaled by men who think they deserve to take your place. You shoot flaming arrows. You drop rocks. You pray. But the tower keeps coming. Every inch it gains chips away at your certainty. Every soldier inside it is a heartbeat waiting to step over your edge. And when that drawbridge finally drops, it's not just a gang of invaders who storms across. It's the shattering realization that your advantage is gone, that the high ground doesn't belong to you anymore. Because siege towers weren't just tools, they were messages. Messages carved from trees and nailed together with vengeance. Your city is not unreachable. Your gods can't save you. We will climb your pride and burn it from the top down. But even as your eyes fixed on the rising tower, even as your breath caught at the sight of men scaling your pride, the real danger might not have been above you at all. Because some enemies didn't climb your walls, they disappeared beneath them, and what they built down there was far more terrifying than anything you could see. Tunneling, silent destruction from below. At least with a siege tower, you could see it. You could measure the threat, count the wheels, watch the soldiers climbing, fire arrows, drop stones, fight back. But what if the enemy didn't come from above? What if they came from below? Not with roars, but with shovels. Not with ladders, but with silence. That's what tunneling was. Not a weapon of force, but of patience. Not an act of war, but of slow, invisible murder. You wouldn't know it was happening at first. You'd be standing on the wall staring at the battering ram or the catapults in the distance, thinking you knew where the battle was. But beneath your boots, men were digging, down into the soil, under the wall, day after day, inch by inch, breath by breath, until they were directly beneath the foundations of your strongest towers. And then they burned it. They packed the tunnel with dry wood, brush, animal fat, anything flammable. And one night, they lit the fire. You wouldn't hear it right away, but the wall would shiver, the ground would moan, and before you could scream, the stone beneath your city's pride would collapse into itself, taking men, memories, and defense with it. Tunneling was the art of making your strength betray you, because your wall wasn't broken by force, it was turned against you. And what made it worse? You could never quite be sure where it was happening, or when, or how close they were. You listened to the ground. You tapped the stone. You laid your ear to the earth and prayed not to hear movement, because if you did, it meant the end was near. Some cities built counter-tunnels, sent in their own miners, underground duels with pickaxes and knives in pitch black. Can you imagine it? Fighting in a coffin, breathing the dust of your own doom, killing men you couldn't see just to stop them from pulling your world down from underneath. This wasn't just engineering. It was psychological warfare at its purest. A siege above ground drained your strength. But a siege below ground? It stole your trust in the earth itself. Because when the dirt is no longer safe, when your walls might be hollow beneath you, when the enemy could be one torch away from burying your history. What do you believe in then? Tunneling didn't just destroy walls. It cracked the human psyche. It made every step uncertain, every stone a question, every moment a countdown you couldn't hear, until it was too late. And just when you thought the worst came from below, when the earth itself turned traitor and your towers collapsed from their own foundations, another horror arrived. Not silent, not subtle, but loud, wild, and merciless. Because if stone could be cracked and soil could be mined, then air itself could be turned into a weapon. Fire weapons. When strongholds became cauldrons. Some walls are too thick to break, some gates too well guarded, some cities too proud to fall by blade or stone, but all of them burn. When brute force couldn't take a city and tunnels failed to collapse its foundations, there was always one final weapon: fire. It was the great equalizer of siege warfare. Crude, unpredictable, but brutally efficient. It didn't require precision, just patience and a favorable wind. You didn't need to aim well, you just needed to light the right corner. And then, wait for the screams. They hurled it with pitch-soaked arrows. They catapulted pots of boiling oil and flaming tar. Sometimes they rolled up carts filled with dry hay and resin, set them ablaze, and shoved them straight into the gates. But the worst, the most feared? Greek fire. A Byzantine invention that was less weapon and more liquid hell. It clung to water. It floated on rivers and burned on contact. It didn't just ignite, it devoured. Imagine standing on a tower, confident your walls will hold, only to see the courtyard below erupt into flame, the stone itself sweating with heat, the sky turning orange as smoke coils into the lungs of your children. Stone doesn't protect you from fire. It traps it, turns your mighty fortress into a furnace. And that's the cruelty of fire in siege warfare. It wasn't meant to destroy the wall. It was meant to cook what was inside. You couldn't fight fire with swords. You couldn't reason with it. You couldn't hold your breath when it came for you. It found your granaries, your timber beams, your thatched roofs and wooden ladders. It found your hope, and it turned it to ash. What made fire so terrifying wasn't just the physical destruction. It was the psychological unraveling that came with it. Flames don't knock at the door. They rush in. They leap over walls. They turn order into chaos in seconds. One moment, you're defending your home. The next, you're choosing whether to burn or run. And that choice, that final humiliation of flight, is what fire was always after. It didn't want to break your wall. It wanted to break your resolve. Because in the end, a city doesn't fall when its towers do. It falls when the people inside stop fighting to save it. And fire knows exactly how to make you surrender. But sometimes, you didn't even need flames. Sometimes it wasn't fire that made a city crumble, but silence. Because while fire could scorch a fortress in hours, fear could hollow it out from within. No smoke, no screaming, just the slow unraveling of human resolve. Psychological warfare, breaking the spirit before the wall. Sometimes you didn't need a battering ram, or fire, or even a single catapult stone. Sometimes all you had to do was wait. Because the human spirit, for all its speeches and heroism and prayer, has limits. And siege warfare was not just about walls. It was about reaching those limits first. Cut off the city. Surround it like a noose tightening by the day. Let the grain rot. Let the water spoil. Let the air fill with the stench of the dead who couldn't be buried properly anymore. Then start the whispers. The king is hiding food for himself. The soldiers will flee and leave us to die. If we surrender, they might spare the children. Fear doesn't march through the gates. It grows, in cellars, behind curtains, around cooking fires where there's nothing left to cook. It makes neighbors into informants, fathers into deserters, noblemen into negotiators, with no authority but desperation. And when you're starving, when you're watching your daughter waste away while pigeons vanish from rooftops and rats vanish from the alleys, morale doesn't just fall, it implodes. That's when the enemy sends messages. Polite at first. Lay down your arms. You fought bravely. We will show mercy if you surrender now. You still have a chance to save your people. Then the tone changes. This is your last warning. We're coming, whether the gates open or not. Choose, dignity or ashes. Sometimes they threw decapitated heads over the walls, sometimes rotting limbs with plague, sometimes letters signed by a friend inside who had already switched sides. The goal was never just conquest. It was internal collapse, because a wall is only as strong as the people behind it. And when those people are hungry, grieving, hopeless, even the strongest stone becomes useless. There were cities that fell without a single blow, because someone, anyone, opened a postern gate in the night, or mutinied, or begged the rulers to stop the suffering. And that's the part no chronicle records, the exact moment when a city gave up quietly, long before the fire or steel ever arrived. The siege had already succeeded, not by breaking the wall, but by breaking the will to defend it. But here's the part that stings the most. The siege didn't die with the Middle Ages. Because once generals learned you could break a city without touching its walls, they never forgot. From ancient tech to modern warfare, the siege never ended. You'd think it ended when the castles crumbled, when kings were replaced by parliaments, when stone walls gave way to glass towers and satellite signals, when we traded swords for drones. But you'd be wrong. Because the siege, the real siege, was never about the weapons. It was about the mindset behind them. And that mindset, that cold, methodical resolve to outlast, outsmart, and outpsych the enemy, it never left. In the Middle Ages, you starved a city by burning its crops. Today, you cripple a nation through sanctions. You choke trade routes, freeze bank accounts, cut access to medicine, data, and electricity. And the people inside still suffer. No fireballs, just silence at the pharmacy, darkness in the hospital, empty shelves and full graves. You don't throw heads over walls anymore. You let news anchors do it for you, or memes, or AI-generated propaganda sowing panic from 10,000 miles away. You don't need a siege tower when a hack into a power grid can bring a modern city to its knees in a single night. The language of conquest has changed, but its grammar remains chillingly familiar. We still talk of breaking resistance, of psychological operations, of winning hearts and minds while slowly suffocating them. And just like in ancient times, the first thing to fall is almost always trust. Trust in leaders, trust in systems, trust in each other. Because when fear becomes louder than reason, when hunger bites deeper than loyalty, we open the gates ourselves. The siege no longer looks like catapults in the fields. It looks like cyber attacks, misinformation, economic pressure, and the slow erosion of hope. Yet, here's the irony. For all our evolution, for all the satellites, algorithms, and global reach, we're still reenacting a script written centuries ago. Wait them out, starve them out, divide them, break them, before the first missile is even launched. Modern warfare didn't erase the old tools. It perfected them. But if that frightens you, good. Because history wasn't meant to comfort us. It was meant to warn. And the siege? It didn't end with flaming arrows or shattered gates. It's still happening, just quieter now, cleaner, more polite on the surface. But if you listen closely, you can still hear it. The whisper of resistance crumbling, the gates creaking open, and somewhere, in the dark, the sound of a city surrendering, without a single wall falling. But the scariest part? It works, not because the past is dead, but because it never really left. History isn't gone. It's just rewritten in us. In the shadows of alleyways, behind palace curtains, beneath ancient stone, and at the foot of crumbling battlements. We've followed the trail of human power at its most raw, from the cold-eyed killers of the medieval underworld to a queen who ruled through poison, prophecy, and maternal fire, to labyrinths carved by a civilization who danced before they bled, to the siege engines that turned cities into graves and human will into ash. We've traveled far, but not away, because the deeper we go into the past, the more we recognize the outlines of ourselves. The assassin of Part 1 wasn't just a relic of medieval bloodshed. He was a mirror of desperation, of survival, of what men become when the world gives them no other name but monster. Olympias, in Part 2, was no ordinary queen. She was power incarnate, the storm inside every woman who has been told she is too much, too cunning, too ambitious to be safe. She was a mother, a mystic, a mastermind, and her legacy, though written in blood, is carved on the crown of history itself. Then we descended into the silent chambers of Part 3, into Minoan Crete, where art and architecture whispered myths that still haunt our imagination. Not everything ancient is brutal. Some of it is unbearably beautiful. But even beauty collapses when time moves forward without mercy. And finally, in Part 4, we stood before the siege. We watched machines of war evolve from wood and rope into cybernetic control. We saw how the walls we build, be they stone, steel, or digital, will always face the same question. Can they hold when the mind inside begins to break? This wasn't just a history lesson. It was a human lesson, a story of how power flows, sometimes through steel, sometimes through whispers, sometimes through love twisted into vengeance, and sometimes through fear that outlasts the fire. And now, as we close this arc, we're left with a strange silence. Not because the story is over, but because it continues in ways we barely recognize. The assassins are now drones. The queens wear suits and silence instead of jewels. The temples are replaced by screens, and the sieges come not with fire, but with algorithms. But the truth remains. The battle has always been for the soul, of the city, of the crown, of the individual. And no matter how much the weapons evolve, the human heart remains the true battlefield. So the question is not, what did we learn from history? The real question is, which part of it are we still repeating?